Hello students, welcome to yet another session of MOOC. Today we'll be doing Unit 37, Module 16. The topic of the unit is Gender and Cinema. The subtopics are Gendering the Gaze, Representations, Censorship, Spectatorship and Critical Analysis. So let's begin. Gendering the gaze. The word gaze mainly came from the term male gaze as introduced by filmmaker and feminist author Laura Mulvey way back in 1975 in her essay Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema, where she mentioned the term male gaze. Over the years, with changes in perception of people in society and transition in the style of storytelling in cinema, we can very well accept that gaze is now not just confined to the male, but also there exists a feminine gaze in regards to representation of genders in cinema. Mulvey states, gender power asymmetry is a controlling force in cinema and constructed for the pleasure of the male viewer, which is deeply rooted in the patriarchal ideologies. The idea of male gaze has entered the realm of television, print, advertising, and even modern theatre for that matter, going beyond cinema. Male gaze, as per Laura Mulvey, represents critique of the mainstream films, its day-to-day sexism and the continued difficulties faced by women directors and lack of good female parts in films. Her essay analyzes sexual politics of Hollywood films and the imbalance of power between the men and women in society, reflected as an imbalance of power on the screen. As cinema is supremely a visual medium, Mulvey feels these gender inequalities were necessarily inscribed into the visual style of cinema itself and how its stories were structured. Female performers, including the women stars, were visualized with all the spectacular attributes of the cinema, but are also highly sexualized and endowed with a quality that Mulvey terms as to be looked at-ness. The male stars, on the other hand, always tended to control the story, and patriarchy responded to the woman as spectacle with a dynamic, active and erotic gaze. This division of labor, feminists like her think, has also transferred to the audiences who play to a particular male visual pleasure. The film's spectators, male or female, couldn't avoid that way of looking at the film and its characters. Mulvey's views in her essay were presented taking the Freudian psychoanalytic theory into consideration. The feminists in 1970s turned to Freudian theories as these illuminated the patriarchal psyche that deciphered the way why women and their bodies and their sexuality were distorted and oppressed by male fantasy. Mulvey also discussed Jacques Lacan's concept of voyeurism that provided an understanding of the unconscious desire through the power of images. During the feminist movement, Mulvey looked at cinema, especially Hollywood productions, as indulging in exploitation and oppression of women, though she always agreed that films as a medium are so rich in the art of storytelling. Film industries across the globe, though, like earlier, even today are dominated by the male producers and directors. Hence, the concept of male gaze cannot be outrightly discarded. But surprisingly, even many women filmmakers somehow adhere to the patriarchal psyche of looking at women and presenting their issues. The male gaze, introduced by Mulvey, states objectifying women as an object of sexual pleasure and not just confined to the male star, but also to the male director and other members of the crew behind the camera and the audiences as well. In film, especially a commercial film, when the female star or protagonist is introduced on the screen, the camera focuses on her body in a way that she is objectified as a symbol of beauty and desire. The female gaze, on the other hand, is a little different. When a female looks at a male figure on screen, not necessarily does she relate to it as an object of sexual desire. Female gaze could also be understood as defiance of the male gaze. They could look at the female character and celebrate her beauty and cognitive abilities. It could establish a broader spectrum of feminine interests, reflecting affection, anger, empathy, and more. As per Mulvey, the gaze goes through 3 stages. 1. It is the way a camera captures the image. 2nd, the way an audience watches what the camera captures. And the 3rd is the gaze of the characters as they look at each other, which is very direct. The camera gaze is the gaze or the eye of the camera that becomes important in the context of the gender perspective of a film. The gaze or eye of the camera is thus connected to those who use the camera to capture the images and also to those who view what the camera looks at and reproduces it as the film. These images combine together to build a relationship between the film and the spectator. Now we come to the next topic, that is representations. Cinema as an art form and one of the most impactful forms of mass media comprises of several compositions and concepts within itself, like perception, representation, adaptation, evaluation, identification, and interpretation. All these together complete this form of art that also generates a gender perspective. The word representation has originally come from Aristotelian theory of mimesis, where the performer tends to imitate real life in the contemporary society of any given culture. What the people in a society or culture accept as physical reality gets imitated and represented as reality through this form of art. A representation is a depiction or a sign that reflects or takes the place of something that is being shown or not shown sometimes. This could be an abstract idea or anything in our environment. A representation could be conveyed through a variety of forms such as cinematic narratives, literature, art, theatre, dance, photography, etc. Representations are an essential component of human life as they help us understand our space and society from different perspectives. A representation can be understood through the subjectivity of the creator of the art or literature associated with a historical context and also the cultural milieu. Now we can talk of representations in Indian mainstream cinema, which will make it easier for you to understand. Gender representations in the mainstream contemporary Indian cinema, that is popularly known as Bollywood, generally it follows a set pattern or formula. For instance, femininity is represented in terms of passivity, chastity, and as the repository of traditional ritualistic values, while controlled anger and violence are characteristics of the male, the hero especially. who is also the protector of the women. But we can also say trends are gradually changing. The new millennium filmmakers, irrespective of their own gender, are trying to experiment with more realistic representations of gender as it is seen through social transitions over the years, not confining to the stereotypes anymore in majority of the films. Films are showing men playing caring family members or nurturing emotional dads. The women are being presented in roles earlier considered the male bastion, whether it is through a female cop in Mardani, all set to fight human trafficking or traffickers, or a submissive wife turning into a shrewd politician trying to bypass her husband in the film Thus We Pass. Or we also can see role reversal in the film Rocky or Rani, where one of the female characters opts to be the bread earner while her male partner, he opts to follow his passion as a Kathak dancer. The audiences are also sensitive enough to representations of the queer and accepting their kind of sexual orientation as normal through different films. And women filmmakers across the globe are taking up themes that not only remain confined to women issues, but also touch upon hot topics like war, politics, and more. So students, now we move to the next topic, censorship. Censorship can be defined as the control of information and ideas being circulated within a society. It involves examination of books, plays, films, television and radio programs, news reports, internet posts, or other forms of communication for the purpose of altering or suppressing ideas found to be objectionable or offensive. This suppression of knowledge and thoughts is carried out through a framework of laws and procedures that are used by governments or organizations to prevent free and unopposed circulation of material in society, as said by Nigel Watson. The rationales for censorship vary from nation to nation and culture to culture. Elements that are considered indecent, obscene, sacrilegious, or seditious are under the radar of those authorized to carry out the censoring of materials and content. Sometimes ideas and voices raised for justice are also curbed in order to retain the strength of social institutions like religious establishments, the family, and the state. Sometimes expressions which are not allowed to be showcased or discussed under the certain governing body of any kind is forced to be associated with the non-acceptable, leading to lack of acceptance of these materials. This could be a work of art or literature, an ideology, a scientific concept, or religious and political spaces. Censorship is established in a society through visible authority as well as through non-formal socio-cultural resistance. In anticipation of undesirable impact of images on spectators, the argument in favor of censorship centers on notions of obscenity, decency, and appropriateness. In India, regulatory censorship is implemented through a series of acts and cultural censorship through some political and social lobbies. Film censorship is enacted via the Central Board of Film Certification, which suggests deletions prior to certification, which is prerequisite for public release of a film. Some believe that freedom of expression is therefore curbed to a large extent, and the spectator's right to see what they prefer is sometimes compromised, forcing all to be passive receivers. Acts related to copyright and censorship in contemporary India can be named as the Cinematograph Act 1952, this act was presented or implemented to make provision for the certification of cinematograph films for exhibition and for means of cinematographs. Young Persons Harmful Publications Act 1956. This act was implemented to prevent the dissemination of certain publications harmful to young persons. Then we have the Copyright Act 1957. This act was introduced to prevent reproduction, circulation, and modifications without any authorization of the copyright owner of the content. Then we have the Cinematograph Certification Rules 1983, which is an offshoot, of course, or continuation of the Cinematograph Act 1952. The rules made by the central government with regard to the exercise of the powers conferred by Section 8 of the Cinematograph Act 1952 and in suppression of the Censorship Rule 1958. Then we also have Indecent Representation of Women Prohibition Act 1986. This is an act to prohibit the indecent representation of women through advertisements or in publications and writings. Or it could be even paintings, figures, or in any other manner and for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. Now, if we come back to the Cinematograph Act 1952, this act provides that a film shall not be certified for public exhibitions if, in the opinion of the competent authority who needs to grant a certificate, that it is suitable for viewership. In India, the Central Board of Film Certification was formed as a statutory body under the Cinematograph Act 1952 to apply censorship on films produced within the country. Now, we'll discuss the role of the CBFC in film censorship. Film censorship in India began sometime back in 1980, long before the independence, when Indian films had begun to capture the entertainment market to a large extent in Western India. The British rulers thought it safer to monitor the contents, and 43 rules were given to the censor board then mentioning what could be objectionable in a film. A cinematographic act came in 1920, and finally it was further developed and came the Cinematograph Act 1952 with amendments. Then we also have the cinematograph rules in 1983 that followed. We just discussed that. And this was done under Article 19, Subclause 2. The Supreme Court of India states that the objections raised for any content of a film should be reasonable and valid under the law. In an important case, that is K.A. Abbas versus Union of India, the UA certificate in films was introduced and the film in concern was Tale of Four Cities. In censorship in India, we have 4 categories under which the certification is done by the Central Board of Film Certification. The first is U, Universal Exhibition, which is considered fit for all age groups to watch. Then we have A, that's for adult audiences. The certification under UA is described as under restricted parental guidance for children below 12 years. And the 4th category is S, that is restricted to special audience. It could be doctors, scientists, armed forces, etc. So this kind of films are not made for the masses, rather just to restricted groups. Then we can briefly discuss the process of certification. Now the process goes like the filmmaker or producer has to submit an application to the Central Board of Film Certification, and mostly in the regional offices related to the region the film needs to be released in and exhibited in. A fee is paid. The regional office forms a committee for viewing the film. The panel has a CBFC officer from the center, 2 women and another man, in total 4 people. A report is submitted by the panel mentioning the required changes, omissions or modifications, including the type of certificate that needs to be issued for the film. The chairperson examines the report. The chairperson can send the film to a review committee for revision necessary for the film if requested by the applicant, who needs to submit another application for the process. The revision is done within 14 days. The applicant is intimated and given a chance for discussion on his or her point of view. If still unhappy, then the applicant can appeal to Film Certification Tribunal within 30 days. The tribunal, headed by a retired judge, hears both sides of the argument and gives a final decision that needs to be accepted. Now we also have certain guidelines for certification. The CBFC follows these guidelines, like the feelings of any community should not be hurt through the content in the film. The morality in the society needs to be maintained. Freedom of expression should responsibly be enjoyed, and interest of the society is to be kept in mind. Violence and crime should not be promoted. Scenes should not adversely affect somebody's health. No cruelty towards animals or children and no disrespect towards any gender should be shown. There should not be any substance abuse that should be promoted. Foreign relations should not be affected through the film. Security and integrity of the nation should be maintained. No use of national emblems should be done without prior permission. There should not be any content in the film that could lead to contempt of court, and no religious sentiments should be hurt. And we also have one more rule that says no explicit sexual content should be exhibited. So constant upgradation and refinement in technology are proving censorship mechanisms as outdated. The ability to mass produce and disseminate digital copies has been complemented by the reach and dynamism of the internet. Banned content can be downloaded and distributed by filmmakers in that uncut version for the spectators to watch all across the world. Further, technological developments and software enhancements are making screen portrayals more realistic or lifelike and impactful, also enhanced by special effects of various kinds. So this is all about censorship. Now we can move to spectatorship and critical analysis. So who is a spectator? A spectator is someone who watches a film, and they all vary from one another. It could be a single person or a group of people watching a film. They all determine spectatorship. They are positioned to take a specific viewpoint of the film and its characters. There are various factors that influence a spectator's response to the film. These could be what expectations they have carried with them to watch the film, where the spectators are watching the film, and with whom and when. The filmmaker also manipulates the perception of the spectator in different ways. This is mostly done by making use of the technical aspects and the use of lights, the angles and movements of the camera, the use of sounds and special effects, and also through editing techniques. The spectator unknowingly gets influenced by these factors, and these get interwoven into the way the story moves forward. There is a spectatorship theory. The spectatorship theory categorizes spectators as active or passive. The passive spectator watches the film with some degree of detachment and does not come with any preconceived ideas. Most of the commercial films cater to passive spectators, where good versus bad is the rule dominating the minds of the spectators. Then we have an active spectator. On the other hand, he reads a film in a more involved manner. According to cultural theorist Stuart Hall, when spectators are provided with a text, the way they read it can be categorized in three ways. The first being preferred reading, the second negotiated reading, and the third is optional reading. The passive spectator mostly indulges in preferred reading, while active spectator indulges in negotiated and optional reading. Now, what is preferred reading? Preferred reading is when the spectator interprets the film as intended by the filmmaker. It could be more commonly seen in films that have a strong element of fantasy, or are biopics where the facts are as they are and not much liberty is taken by the filmmaker to change it or present it in a different way. Then we come to negotiated reading. Negotiated reading is when the spectator accepts the broad elements of the preferred reading but also generates some altered perception in the course of viewing based on the connection the story has with his or her own life, experiences that person has gone through, or understanding of the subject. Then the third is optional reading. Optional reading happens when the spectator rejects the preferred reading and has a very different point of view based on the ideology that they personally cater to or the concepts they carry on the subject presented through the story. Now, a spectator tends to go through the process of alignment and allegiance and also identification. Now, what is alignment? The spectator develops a bond with the character when we talk of alignment. The spectator follows the character on their journey through the film's narrative and they tend to align with them. And then we come to allegiance. The spectator begins to feel he or she is on the side of the character and desires that the character wins over his or her opponents, and the spectator considers the character's actions as justified. Then we have identification. In this case, the spectator begins to identify with the character due to some commonness in the experiences in life or some common situations and circumstances faced by them as being faced by the character on the screen. Certain camera angles help the spectator to connect better with the characters, even though they have nothing in common with the character in real life situations. But somehow, what situations are shown in the film, the spectator begins to relate to those. These could be use of certain camera angles that help the point of view shots where you look through the eyes of the character and get closer to the character in terms of his or her experiences, desires, etc. Even track shots help us move with the character in a certain situation and observe everything as being done by the character. The viewers find themselves in the very place where the character is moving or standing and connect with the surroundings and the happenings and its reactions in the character. They experience the emotions of the character as intended by the filmmaker. It also happens sometimes that there is a larger than life character and the spectators wonder how to connect with such characters who are extraordinary. But even in such cases, the director sees to it that there are certain emotions in the character that are universally common and are displayed by the character at some point that gives the scope to the spectator to identify with him or her. This could be a superhero also playing a dad, or someone very close to nature, or carrying some kind of affection for someone, etc. The shots and camera angles, as we discussed earlier, also contribute to this impact on the audience who get involved with the character. We can talk of films like, say, Superman, Gladiator, or even our very own Indian production Bahubali, where these larger-than-life characters are seen to feel emotions that are very universal to common people, or their integrity and kindness also touches the spectator. Now we move to the final topic, that is critical analysis. Critically analyzing a film is mainly understanding and evaluating the film, keeping its various aspects in consideration. These would include the cinematography, the editing style, use of lights, performance of the actors, the narrative, the theme, the different characters, and how these characters take the story forward. The artwork and the aesthetic aspects, the genre, sound, music, etc. are responsible for the result of the analysis. There's also the requirement to understand the social and cultural context to the story to get a deeper insight into the director's intention behind presenting the story the way it has been. This could also include understanding and evaluating the use of language, music, and also costumes or properties in the film are well supportive sometimes and help analyze the film in a better way. And these also contribute to the development of the story. The way a spectator perceives a film is basically how it determines what his or her analysis is for it. So we come to the end of this session. Thank you for being there.